USC and Fresno State playing a bit of a doubleheader against one another this Saturday in Las Vegas at the Las Vegas Bowl. And then August 30th of 2014, they open up the season against one another. MarkRogersTV focusing on the bowl game this Saturday because most of those Bulldogs and Trojans players that we talk about right now will not be suiting it up for USC and Fresno State come next August. Let's focus first on USC in a tumultuous season for the Trojans at 9-4, and a bit of a triumph when you really look at what these players had to endure this season. Coming off a 7-6 campaign that was a major disappointment, a preseason number one crashing down to a Sun Bowl embarrassment against Georgia Tech in December. They come into this season with not a whole lot of expectations, although that's relatively speaking against the USC standards. Lane Kiffin fired after giving up 62 points against Arizona State. Ed Orgeron comes in and inspires the troops, gives them some purpose and some meaning, and they start to have fun, and they play some good football and going 6-1 before losing that finale against UCLA. Orgeron not retained. Bring in Steve Sarkisian from Washington, who will be up in the press box, but not coaching, just observing his 2014 talent. And on the sideline will be offensive coordinator Clay Helton. No, the Trojans did not bring in a fourth coach for this season. He is the offensive coordinator and has been the quarterback's coach for the last 4 years. So let's talk USC offense first, because it's been a struggle, but it's been a developing offense this season for USC, starting with Cody Kessler, who won the job in the first couple games of the season. Finished with pedestrian statistics, but he was pretty solid down the stretch. 65% completion percentage, 16 touchdowns, and 6 picks. Okay, key stat here. USC was last in the Pac-12 in converting third downs. They need to convert third downs in this game to keep Derek Carr off the field. The Trojan running game has been prominent this season, trying to keep pressure off of Cody Kessler so he is not the man that needs to throw for 400 yards per game. And the running game has mostly been successful. Trey Madden led the team with 703 yards, even in the absence of Silas Redd, who was hurt much of 2013. Then you also have Buck Allen, who really took over down the stretch, scoring 10 touchdowns in the last 5 games, and overall at 6.5 yards per carry and 12 rushing touchdowns for Buck Allen. Okay, at wide receiver, Marquise is the name, but could not produce up to his standards this season because of the offensive line and because of the significant emphasis on the running game and keeping the pressure off of Cody Kessler. Marquise caught like 122 passes last season for 14 touchdowns. This season, 50 receptions for Marquise and just 2 scores for that dynamic of a talent. Well, this is most likely his last game at USC. He's going to the NFL, probably despite the decline in numbers. People know his ability in the NFL. He will be a mid-first-round pick, and the New York Jets really like him, and they should. Nelson Aguilar established himself as the number 2 guy, caught 51 passes for 4 touchdowns. Also, Darius Rogers got some playing time as the 3rd wide receiving threat. USC's other pro prospect in this game for you draft nicks who like to observe the games from that perspective and watch it in regards to who are the NFL prospects. Kevin Graff should be a 2nd-round pick in the NFL. He was the USC right tackle, and this will be his final game with USC. Now let's look at the defense, where we really have some NFL prospects and some serious playmakers, starting with Devon Kennard, who had 9.5 sacks this season at outside linebacker and defensive end. This is a defense that, despite the 62 given up at Arizona State that was really the final nail in the coffin for Lane Kiffin, this defense performed extremely well, considering the Pac-12 schedule it faced. And I know it wasn't Oregon or a lot of power opponents outside of conference, but still 21st scoring defense in the country. There's some serious talent on this defense. So we mentioned Kennard, also Morgan Breslin, who should be a 1st-round pick. Now, he's been nicked up this season, only played 5 games. So the overall stats don't match his 2012 production. 19.5 tackles for loss, 13 sacks. 2012, 2013, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, but in 5 games. So Morgan Breslin is still a force. At defensive tackle, and you've got Leonard Williams. He's just a sophomore, so USC doesn't have to worry about losing him next season. He had 5 sacks and 12.5 tackles for loss. Leonard Williams is a stud up front. We've got in the backfield, a slew of players, starting with Cravens, who as a freshman had 4 interceptions. He came in highly touted, got hurt in the spring, recovered very quickly from that. So despite missing spring practice as a freshman, phenomenal talent. Again, 4 interceptions from Cravens. You've got the strong safety in Dion Bailey, who also plays linebacker. He's kind of a tweener, and NFL scouts are looking at that to see where he fits. He had 5 interceptions and 4.5 tackles for loss. He's projected as a top 100 player in April's NFL draft. And also cornerback Josh Shaw could decide to leave USC. He had 3 interceptions and 5.5 tackles for loss. Josh Shaw. Okay, look at the defense and look at the overall roster for USC. This is a remarkable number that there are 32 draft-eligible juniors and 30-year sophomores on this team. So above anything else, Steve Sarkisian is going to be recruiting his own team to try to keep most of this defensive talent in Los Angeles. Okay, we've looked at USC. We also have to mention this kid, Hayes Pollard, because he doesn't get a whole lot of pub with all this other dynamic talent around him, but he's the leading tackler on the team. He's a very sure player, very sure tackler, plays very well in coverage. He's steady. Hayes Pollard, he's a junior middle linebacker who will probably come back to play for Sarkisian in 2014. All right, Fresno State, let's talk about all the fun offense and the passing because it is superior. Derek Carr is a top 5 NFL pick, so he's throwing for a ton of yardage, but he is expected to be able to relate that to NFL play. He threw for 4,900 yards and 48 touchdowns. How prolific was he this season? He threw 48 touchdowns to lead the nation. That's 12 better than anybody else. He also threw for 400 more yards than anybody else. And again, he projects out as a top 5 pick for a number of teams who need quarterbacks, i.e. Jacksonville, Cleveland, and on down the list in the NFL. All right, at wide receiver, you've got Davante Adams, who caught 122 passes for 1,600 yards and 23 touchdowns. And how prolific is he? He caught 23 touchdowns, and Brandon Cooks of Oregon State caught 15. He was second in the nation, 23-15 over the second best guy in all of college football. He caught more receptions this season, or actually more touchdown passes, Davante Adams, than 87 FBS teams. That only leaves like 35 to 40 other teams. And this kid was only a 2-star recruit who maxed out his ability and really made it happen in Fresno State. He may opt for the NFL draft. He is a redshirt sophomore. 2 other main producers at wide receiver for Fresno State, Isaiah Burse, 94 receptions and 5 touchdowns. He's a senior, so he's gone in 2014 along with Carr and most likely Adams. Junior coming back, most likely Josh Harper. Look out for him, 79 receptions, 13 touchdowns for Josh Harper. You've got a couple running backs, so Fresno State doesn't rely specifically on one guy. These guys pretty much split carries. The junior and Josh Quezada, who ran for 787 and 6 touchdowns, also caught 48 passes out of the backfield. And you've got also a senior in Marquise Waller, who ran for 7 touchdowns and 629 yards. One more NFL prospect on offense you need to look out for if, again, this is your game. You've got Austin Wentworth, who should be a mid-4th, 5th-round pick, the offensive tackle for Fresno State. Now let's look at the defense, which is a bit leaky even in winning the Mountain West Conference with a 12-1 record. With all that scoring on offense, you can look at it 2 ways. Was the defense leaky or just trying to keep pace with these type of football games being played when the offense was scoring in 90 seconds or 2 minutes, being on the field for more possessions? You can look at that as well. You've got the leading tackler in Carl Mickelson. He's a junior, so he'll be back in 2014. 88 stops, led the team. He also led the Mountain West in solo tackles, 7th overall in total tackles. The biggest playmaker is Jiro Ederain. He's the biggest playmaker on this defense. He's just a sophomore, outside linebacker for Fresno State. 15.5 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. Both those statistics 3rd in the conference. And Darren Smith, who Caught 6 interceptions, made 6 interceptions, number 1 total in the Mountain West. Also made plays in the backfield from his safety position with 7.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. And also have to mention the junior linebacker, Donovan Lewis, who's also a very steady player, kind of the Fresno State version of Hayes Bullard. There it is, Fresno State and USC. We will have a pick coming up when we make our bowl predictions coming up in just a few days. Would love to hear your take on the Bulldogs and the Trojans. How much does USC have in the tank? They historically don't show up for these types of bowl games. The last time USC won a bowl game, they did win this kind of game when they took out Boston College in the Emerald Bowl in 2009 with Pete Carroll on the sideline for his last game. But usually USC, look at last season against Georgia Tech, think of themselves as playing in bigger bowl games. Don't know if they're going to show up for Fresno State. Would love to hear from you, Bulldog and Trojan fans, on Mark Rogers TV.